This week on Quality Digest Live, we consider how small changes can lead to big improvements.
That's right. Plus, questioning the wisdom of quotas. That more when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live from May 11th, 2018 from windy Chico, California.
Yeah.
QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest editor-in-chief, Dirk Ducharme.
And I have to say, Dirk, you're looking fabulous today.
You like this shirt?
I love that shirt.
It came from your closet.
Shirt that I would buy for myself.
Yeah, your wife gave this to me.
The weave of the shirt is just fantastic. You look marvelous.
You see me running out the back door this morning. More and more we're seeing the digitization of manufacturing. So what are we talking about here? Well, obviously, CAD CAM has been around for a long time, designing, computer-aided design and manufacturing. Then we saw going directly from CAD to direct machine programming. So rather than, setting up CNCs or measurement equipment, manually, it's going direct from CAD into the programming phase of that. And then, of course, in our realm in test and measurement, we've got CAD and 3D measurement data that are compared to each other, and differences are detected and then fed back into the process to automatically control them. Well, now we're going, and also virtual and virtual reality and augmented reality are also part of this whole thing. But now we're talking about digital validation. So this is where you take your complete digital model of something, and let's say an autonomous vehicle, for instance. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then you kind of digitally tickle all its inputs and outputs and sensors and so forth, but not in reality. You do it within the computer. Since everything is designed and exists in a digital model, you can do all these simulations. You know what happens if this sensor goes off? Well, do the brakes go on, for instance, and that sort of thing. And it's all done within the body of the software. Now, what we aren't quite to yet is where we can do away with physical testing. I mean, it's interesting, we have all this capability within the digital realm, but we're still hesitant to let go of the physical testing. And one of the reasons we're seeing this, he mentions it in his article, Virtual Validation on the Rise, but Physical Testing Remains Crucial. Reporter Terry Koslow writes that 5 years ago, many observers predicted that validation, verification would all but replace physical testing. But within the automotive industry, there's some changes going on that are kind of maybe putting the brakes on that. And one of the reasons is, let's say, autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles you think would be ideal for this, but they aren't, because part of one of the big things with autonomous vehicles is the need to do safety checks. And there's still this sense that, from the safety aspect of it, and I'm reading into this a little bit, but we don't want to trust necessarily what the software is telling us. There's still a lot to be said about having a driver in a test vehicle going out doing real world simulations to see how the car actually responds, not just trusting that the software will say, oh, if this happens, this happens, this happens, then this will be the car's response. There's still a need for this real world testing. But along with that then, aside from how much virtual, how much physical testing we do, measurement techniques may also have to evolve, says Koslow. Most companies, when we're talking about vehicles, still use driving miles as their metric, even for tests conducted on virtual vehicles. So some of you car aficionados probably knows, when a new car comes out, that car is handed over to maybe Motor Trend and Car and Driver and various other, let's say then, testing organizations, as well as they will give the car maybe out to employees and stuff, and everybody is going to do a certain amount of driving. They're going to keep track of what did they like, what they didn't like, anything that they noticed. Well, this amounts to maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of miles in real world drive testing.
Crowdsourcing.
Yeah, kind of crowdsourcing the testing.
Crowdsourced driving, yeah.
But the thing with that is that with a traditional vehicle, a lot of what's going on is going on in the human brain. So all they're really testing is maybe comfort, fit, maybe any anomalies they noticed, when they're driving. Does it brake weird? Does it steer weird? That sort of stuff.
Butt feel.
Butt feel. There is the butt feel, exactly. Is it comfortable?
Yeah, there you go.
So they're saying when it comes to autonomous cars, you probably still need a certain amount of that, but you also, within the software realm, may need to say, we need to do this many testing of scenarios. How many different real-world scenarios can we put into the software and run it through kind of virtual safety checks, as well as the safety checks that you're going to get with real-world driving. So even though all of this stuff is digital now, and it is conceivable that you could test everything in software, you're not going to see that go anywhere, and I think mostly because of safety concerns. There's still that feeling that I want a human to tell me how well this thing is doing.
Yeah, and some of it I wonder about, because vehicles, cars are so ubiquitous, and autonomous vehicles are such a pseudo-controversial transition.
Right. Yeah.
I wonder how much of this is also CYA.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly,
it's not really so much about the testing as it is about the fact that, oh no, this was tested by a actual human being.
Or even just to make people feel comfortable.
Yeah.
It's like, human beings really tested our autonomous vehicles, rather than what you just did all this testing in the computer and then you put it on the shop on the floor for me to buy.
Yeah.
I think it's a certain amount of comfort level.
Absolutely, great. All right. Well, did you know this, Dirk, that reflecting on what makes you angry can serve an important purpose, actually, in thinking. Let's not go there, Dirk. But it can serve an important purpose in thinking about the meaning of your organization and its culture. Do you ever think about that? I mean, an emotion like anger
no.
can serve you? I mean, we always say don't be angry.
Yeah, don't be angry, yeah.
But, anger can actually serve you. We're going to find out how. In the article, How to Find Your Company's Core Values by executive coach Trevor Thrones, it appeared last month on the Thought Leaders blog. We linked out to the piece in Monday's issue of the Quality Digest newsletter. Now, Thrones believes that there's a simple way to cut through the meaningless, amorphous, and the feel-good word salad that often passes for value or mission statements in most organizations. Instead, he suggests you get to the point of the matter by thinking about what really burns your saddle.
Burns your saddle.
What grinds your gears, as old friend Craig Howell would say.
You know what burns my butt?
What does?
A fire about that high.
That high? That's pretty high, Dirk. Wow.
I'm sorry. About that high.
You got long legs.
Long legs, yeah. All right.
All right, well, focusing on anger and frustration, it may not be what most people consider to be good ways to figure out how and why you do what you do, but Thrones' point, I think, is a valid one. When you think about the last time you really got angry, really mad at someone in your organization, it's a clue as to those things that truly matter to you. As an example, he talks about a training that he did, okay? They had a team gathered, an executive team, and it was a long day, it was a hot day. They were trying to define their company's attitudes and values, what really mattered to them, and it was frustrating. There was a few people in the room, and they weren't really getting anywhere. So tempers were getting short anyway, I think, if you read between the lines for what he's saying here. So Thrones finally, at the end of the day, kind of asked one of the owners, what was the last time she got angry with someone and what it was about? And she had the answer like that. It was a snap answer. It turns out that what really got her angry was the last time was when a manager didn't respect one of the people on his team. She said, what really burns me, and I was just so mad, is when this guy didn't respect this person on his team. Okay. Disrespected her, didn't give her props, whatever it was, didn't explain exactly what, but that's what really made her mad. And in a moment it became clear, respect for all became the defining value for the organization. It came out of anger. Came out of a series of, well, we're angry about this behavior, so our value is that we don't want that because that's where our passion is. So that anger led to the answer. Pretty cool. your people reflect your values, right? And vice versa. So knowing who and what you can and can't tolerate really is a good way to achieve insight into what you do and why you do it. And that's really the point, is that you're trying, when you're running an organization, you're trying to establish these statements, and we all do it. I mean, we've done it here, where we try to establish our mission and vision statements. But we always have this idea that this like a kumbaya moment of well, it's so great when we do this, we feel so good about it.
Right.
That's a great thing to do, and you should do that. You should feel good about what you're doing, but don't forget about the passion of some anger. You're throwing us and saying, when you get to that, you begin to unspool some of the things that really matter to you, and the things that violate those things that matter to you is when you know that you've hit on something that really is important, and that's your vision.
But I would say there's also the other side of that is that it may also point out a flaw in your own thinking. You know, so for instance, if you say, well, this makes me angry, and you start to reflect on it, well, it may be pointing out something that you think needs to be worked on within the organization, or that's important for the organization. That it may also point out a weakness in yourself. You know, does it really make sense for me to get angry over this thing? Am I making too much of it? I mean, I think it causes some self-reflection as well, because it's like, you know, maybe there's nothing wrong there. Maybe it's me. What's going on inside of me that thing should bother me?
You know, that's an excellent point. He did not mention that. He didn't go there with it, but when you think about it from the perspective of executives trying to lead organizations, looking at your blind spots and looking at the things that are angry and why you're angry about them is a pretty effective way to do it too. He's thinking about it externally, like this thing happening in the market or our employees are doing is making me angry. But taking the step back and saying, all right, why am I angry? What psychologically within me makes me have that reaction? It's a pretty valuable way to find why you do what you do as well. That's a good point, Dirk.
Exactly. Well, talking about, this is kind of along the same lines of improvement. Are you running a big improvement machine? That is what Mark Rosenthal calls it, when companies crank out process improvements one after the other, faster than the process can absorb the improvements. It's kind of a overproduction, Rosenthal calls it. It's an overproduction of improvement ideas rather than, let's say, an overproduction of things. But it suffers from the same problems. Whenever you overproduce something, in this case, big ideas, you're doing something that can't be absorbed by the downstream process. So if you're making improvements too fast and your process can't absorb them, well, then it's waste, right? Your improvements got to be able to roll through. You can't just keep piling them on. Rosenthal talks about this in his article, Overproduction versus Fast Improvement Cycles. And one problem is that changes are often too big, says Rosenthal. So big, they can't really be, let's say, tested out on paper before you throw them at the process. And the result is that when you do finally throw this big improvement at the process, there's a flurry of activity trying to make the various pieces of the improvement work. Because when you get down to it, if you think about it, a large change is really just a whole bunch of small changes in one big package. So it's not like you're saying, do this one big thing, and everybody does it and does this one big thing. It's no, you're throwing this big package, and there's all these little pieces, there's all these little moving parts, and this person's got to do this, and this person's got to do that. We're thinking maybe like a blitz, right? And all these people are doing it. Some of these parts may come together really well, some of them may cause a bottleneck, but you can't deal with it properly because you threw the whole thing at them all at once. Right.
I mean, it's a perfect quality issue that you're talking about here, because
you're batching.
You're batching, but it's also process orientation. Right. And it's throughput, like you're saying. I mean, you don't want to batch that stuff. You want to do it individually if you can and break it down into its component parts.
It is. It's basically, a kind of a single piece flow is what you're looking for. And so that's where he gets around to talking about a slow, steady stream of small, and we're talking, small, changes. And the small changes can be visualized a little bit more easier. They can be vetted much more easily, let's say on paper, so to speak, before rolling them out. So now what you're doing is, rather than this one big chunk that you're throwing at people, you're feeding them small little changes. Here's a small little change. Here's a small little change. They're rolling out slowly, but they're small. So this gives you a lot of real advantages. We'll get to those in a second. So when he says, one thing that happens when you start doing these small little changes is that you start getting some immediate feedback. And another problem he points to is that very often people will wait for everything to be perfect before they say, okay, we've got it all figured out, so we're going to throw this change at you and do it. He says, and the problem is when you're waiting that long, even with small changes, you're denying yourself some data. He says, go ahead and don't wait for that small little change to be perfect on paper before you say, let's roll this out. Get it going. He says, a couple things happen from that. Once you get those small changes out there, you'll start getting feedback. Is this change working? Is it not change? Is the change not working? You can take that data and affect maybe the other small changes that are waiting in the queue, right? They haven't gone out there yet. Now contrast this, when you throw one big ball of wax out there, if there's some data that could have affected some of the other changes that were in this big package, well, it's too late. You've already thrown the whole thing out there. Now you've got to kind of scurry and kind of patch and mend and all that, right? Do it single piece, get that feedback, and that can allow you to adjust your other improvements before you roll them out. You know, as he says, you know, the sooner you start actively learning and trying to design perfection, the quicker you'll get something working. So another key point is that your employees need to learn how to do something. They need to learn how to implement change. And learning something new always involves doing it slowly at first and probably poorly, but you get better. And this is a slow process. These are small changes. And so this is okay. Slow is okay because you're only slowing down one small little piece of the puzzle. But eventually what happens, says Rosenthal, is you roll out these small changes. These small changes, they happen slowly. You're getting data for them, but they happen smoothly, again, because they're small. And so kind of his mantra is that you end up with something's rolling out slowly but smoothly, but in the long run, it's actually faster than if you were to bundle all these things into one package and chuck the whole thing out there all at once. That slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Is kind of what he says.
It's like the it's like the analogy for me is it's like you have a little 4-foot snake. Right, a little snake that tried to eat like a fat chicken, you know. So like it eats it and it just lays there for like a day, you know, trying to this huge chicken in the middle of it. And like eventually it'll. But I mean, you know, as opposed to having little meals as it goes. I mean, the idea is it slows everything down. I mean, you're not going to really be able to be efficient with that one. I mean, eventually, yes, you will be able to digest even the largest of projects, but. It's not, as you say, it's not smooth is fast, really, when you think about it. And you think you're being fast by trying to swallow this big thing, but it's just going to slow everything down. And the other thing I think about is its value streams, right? I mean, you know, you talk about flow, you've got to understand that if you put something into that value stream that's going to obstruct everybody in the team having to focus on it, you're not really going to be able to throughput value to the customer eventually. So,
and that's the other thing, this just occurred to me as well, is usually that small change is going to affect fewer people. So you may have a little bit of disruption over here as that group or that person is coming up to speed on how to implement this process improvement. As opposed to you throw this big package out there. Now everybody's disrupted because everybody's all, you know, butts and elbows running around trying to get things done, and now you've disrupted the entire process. Well,
you think about it, I mean, if you do have a few people on the team who are disrupted, but then can learn, they then are advocates to help the new process, the new skill they've learned, share it with other people on other parts of the team. So I mean, maybe you disrupt 5 people as opposed to 25 or 50. Those 5 then will maybe suffer for a little while and have to figure it out. But once they do, and then you begin to spread it, they can then help be advocates for the change. Say, hey, yes, I know what you're going through. I know you're having this problem right now. I had that when I was starting out with this too, but here's the value eventually for doing it, so stick with it, I'll help you get through it. That's really helpful.
So don't batch your process improvement.
Don't eat a big chicken.
Don't eat a big chicken, small.
Eat
small little pieces, nuggets.
That's
little chicken nuggets.
Speaking of chicken nuggets, Dirk, you know where they have chicken nuggets? They have chicken nuggets at fast food restaurants.
Oh, yeah. Any particular one?
No. But we're not going to mention which fast food restaurant, but there is one out there that's...
That Scottish one.
Yeah. All right, Dirk. No more from you.
Scottish fast food restaurant.
You need to get us sued, Dirk. All right. Well, our good buddy, QD account manager Christopher Martin wrote one of his typically enlightening op-eds in the QD newsletter last week. Questioning Quotas is the name of the piece, and it appeared on Thursday, May 3rd, so it was actually last week. So Chris and his kid went to a will not be named, Dirk, fast food restaurant recently, and the dude behind the counter did something rather odd. So
what was that?
There was like nobody in the place, right?
Okay, it's empty. All right.
It's pretty empty. I think he said it was actually empty. Maybe there was a couple people there. And so Chris and his kid went up to the counter and they were going to order their thing, and the guy like disappeared. He's like, are you ready to order? And Chris is like, yeah. So the guy like disappeared somewhere. Just like, where's he going? He went to a kiosk. Right? Like, have you seen some of these stores have like these self-serve kiosks now where you can punch in your order?
It's like an iPad or something.
And you order what you want. Yeah. So the guy verbally gave the order to the guy. He punched it into the thing.
Went over, and the kiosk is out in the customer area.
It's right. He had to walk out behind the counter and do it. So Chris is like, well, are you doing that because you're trying to train me on how to do this? He's like, no. They're busting my chops because I'm not processing enough of my orders
through the
at
kiosk.
This kiosk. The management wants us to like get these kiosks up and going. So, every once in a while when it's slow or whatever, I'll just walk out and I'll take one of the orders in the kiosk. Now,
so
Chris
it's
like,
supposed to be the customers that are doing the kiosk.
Right. And Chris is like, well, you're doing this to train me? No, I just have to do it. And meanwhile, it took like 3 times as long to have this thing done, get the order and all this stuff, right? It was nuts. I mean, it totally not thinking about the customer in this whole process, right? I mean, if you think about it, now Deming, for instance, he abhorred quotas. He was famous about abhorring quotas,
right.
And it was one thing he always said that you needed to get rid of. QD CEO Jeff Dewar, he mentioned in his comments in Christopher's piece that Deming had this idea about quotas. He actually talked about an event that he went to that Deming had in the 80s where he gave a lot of grief to a Ford VP about quotas.
You humiliated him, I think.
Yes, he did. And Deming humiliated a few thousand people in his career. In fact, in terms of comments on Chris's piece, there's a lot of good comments. A few of them in Chris's article. So if you want to check them out and read them, you can see it and add your own, because I mean we like to have comments. We have a quota for comments.
Right.
So the question is, why are quotas bad? Well, there's a couple of reasons that really jump out, and that Christopher mentions in his article. The first one is that it's easy to game the system. I mean, like this guy did, the guy behind the counter. I mean, especially if there's financial incentives involved, right? I mean, in this case, there wasn't really a financial incentive involved, but in many cases, like you think about the Wells Fargo thing a year or two ago, where they're creating all these millions of these accounts, these phantom accounts for customers because they had financial incentives they're trying to reach, right? Doesn't do the customer any good. It hurts the customer. It hurts the company because they're wasting time on non-value-added stuff. So you're gaming the system, even if there's not financial incentives, but certainly if there are. The other thing is, because of that first point, the gaming of the system, quotas really skew the data. I mean, they view it kind of like an artificiality, and it really makes it impossible to measure the effectiveness of a new process or procedure that you might be putting in place.
Sure. I mean, here's this fast food restaurant. So they're getting a fake idea of how well customers are adopting. It's doing great. Customers are using this kiosk like crazy. Well, maybe they aren't.
That's right. And it's like if you force the employees to do it, the data you're getting out of that, it's garbage in, garbage out. So the idea is you're trying to do this new process or procedure, launch it to get information about how it does and make decisions based on it. You're going to make faulty decisions if the data's faulty. And finally, this is really an important one to me, it really communicates a lack of trust from management to the employees. Basically, they're saying, you've got to do this. I don't care what you know. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you're seeing when you're interacting with customers. We want this to happen. Do it. Shut up and do it. It's basically what quotas are saying, right? I mean, you think about like Costco versus Walmart, right? I mean, these are two of the largest big box companies, retailers in the world. I mean, and really one of them, Costco, is one that really treats its employees with a lot of respect and really, gives them a good wage and trusts them to know what they're doing. Walmart doesn't do that. Walmart's very much a shuffle them in, shuffle them out kind of company. And it's just a very different approach to how retailers can handle the way they deal with their employees. So the question as I close this up is, what's really a better way to handle goal setting and quotas if you need to have them? Well, I think really the focus needs to be on the customer. In general, I think if you act in his or her best interest, you're not going to stray too far from doing the right thing. I mean, in this case, Christopher was there with his kid, and like I say, it took him 3 times as long to get the order. I mean, it's silly to fulfill this artificial quota and hurt the customer's throughput in this way. It's like, get him out, get the customer in and out. Don't waste his or her time. That's ridiculous. The other thing is, have employees weigh in on the measures that matter and that what's the best way that they can improve them. They're the ones that know. Again, if you trust them and you want to improve a process, ask your employees. Don't say, do this. Say, what do you think we should do? And there's going to be some level of order in this because you have a hierarchy, but eventually you want to at least bring them in on the process and have the respect for them to do that. And then you want to look at the organization in a holistic way. I mean, you need to balance the needs of your customers, your stakeholders, your managers, and your employees, and take them into account, right? At least take them into account. The system isn't going to be gamed that way, and if it is, it's not going to be gamed for long, because ultimately, again, if you focus on everybody within the system, especially the customers, that's going to tell you the way that you need to go in terms of doing what you need to do. And if quotas make sense, maybe they make sense in some cases. In many cases, they probably don't. You probably want to look at getting rid of them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because just in that example with the fast food restaurant, there's so many other things that they could have done that would have been valuable. It's like, you could have instructed the counter people to say, have you used our kiosk?
Right.
And then have them relate back why people would say, no, I don't want to use it. I mean, in other words, they could have gotten some real world feedback perhaps by having the manager talk to counter people later and saying, why aren't people using the kiosk? And they would have gotten all sorts of answers. Well, they didn't notice it when they came in the door. Well, maybe the kiosk is in the wrong place.
That's right.
Or they don't like dealing with technology, or it was too confusing all of that would have been more valuable information than simply having them keep a quota and,
or incentivize, if you're going to incentivize somebody, incentivize the customer. Say, hey, we'll give you 20% off your order if you use the kiosk and give us your feedback. Have a little response form right there by the kiosk.
That's actually really cool.
I mean, but McDonald's will say, I don't want to give 20% off, 10% off, whatever, or give them a free Big Mac or whatever. Next time they go. Did I say McDonald's?
A Scottish burger.
Yeah, that's right.
Give them a free.
Exactly. Give them whatever.
Give them a free Scottish burger.
Exactly.
Double.
Sure. McDouble.
Give them a McDouble.
Give them a flurry. They have that as McDonald's.
All right. So we got a couple of minutes left. What do you want to talk about, Mike? Hey, what have you read anything interesting related to quality?
I have.
In the news this week.
I have. I actually, we talked about this last week. We're doing a series at the end of the month, and it's on U.S.-China relationship, and this is a bigger topic than we could probably get into in 3 minutes, but there was an article I read, and I forget the name of the company, but it's because I just read it literally last night, and I just took a glance at it. But there's a company that is basically going under. It's a multi-billion-dollar Chinese manufacturing company, and they're reliant on U.S. components. Have you heard the story?
No.
Okay. They're relying on U.S. components, but because of the trade war that's brewing now, they're not being able to access these American components. And they're essentially going to go under because of this. And it's a multi-billion-dollar company. There's many thousands of people in China that are working for it. So basically, these people are being furloughed. The company's probably going to go under at some point, sooner rather than later. These people are going to be out of work. But the really interesting takeaway part of this, and excuse me for brutalizing it, but it'll be in my story in a couple of weeks. I'll reference this article in a better way. The takeaway here, though, is that the Chinese government is thinking about this very hard. And they're saying, okay, look what happened here. We're exposed. We're exposed because we're reliant on anybody, in this case American manufacturers, to provide components for our manufacturers. We need to have a homespun industry to provide the stuff for ourselves, which they don't, apparently, these particular components. There's a hole in their gap, but they've been able to access it through America, and they're able to get them that way through the supply chain. So they're thinking, well, we've got to get away from that. We're exposed. We have to have this industry in our own country. So think about the boomerang effect, the unintended consequences of American policy. So they're saying, okay, well, we're going to make it very difficult. We're going to put the screws to these Chinese manufacturers by forbidding them from having access to components from, say, Apple But what's going to happen? It's just going to launch more competitors for Apple.
Right.
Chinese are going to fulfill this on their own. The whole is going to grow that Apple's not going to, or whomever it is that's providing these components, isn't going to be able to fill because they're going to lose all these customers, and China's going to get the benefit of it. So there's despite what people in our administration would say, there really aren't any winners in a trade war. And the unintended consequences of what happens when you launch these trade wars is devastating. And it's not even devastating at the time. It can be years or decades down the line where you see the ramifications of these things.
Right.
So, yeah, I have been reading some interesting things about how these things play out.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because particularly in the high-tech sector of Chinese production, there is a huge amount going on, both in terms of quality. I don't know if many people know, you may not have heard, maybe you have heard of Huawei. Huawei makes smartphones. Their smartphones,
very smartphones.
Very smartphones. Their smartphones are only second. Their smartphone worldwide now, in terms of quality and sales, are third behind Apple and Samsung. And it's not just Huawei. There's like 4 other Oppo and a couple other Chinese companies that are just lined up right behind Apple and Samsung. Very good phones, really well accepted. And the thing is now the Chinese, who normally buy a lot of electronics and so forth from foreigners because they've had problems with quality. Chinese customers don't like poor quality any more than anybody else. But China's middle class is drastically expanding, and the Chinese manufacturers, of course, they want a piece of that market. And so what's happened is they have really upped their game in terms of quality, particularly in electronics, consumer electronics. And again, it's causing the same thing, is all of that manufacturing effort now is being focused in China to sell to Chinese customers, which essentially eventually is going to cut out the foreigners who are bringing products into China.
Well,
it's an interesting problem.
And as I mentioned,
for foreigners,
and as I mentioned, the components of this, which traditionally have been sourced, as I understand from this piece I was glancing at, which have been sourced in many cases from America, aren't anymore because of these barriers now to trade. So they're having to source it even right down to the barest components in their own country. That's not a good thing, eventually, for U.S. trade. I mean, if China can be so self-sufficient that they can create smartphones that sell for $2,000 a pop, some of these do, right? At the upper limits for Huawei. America loses, right? But I mean, maybe it's even passé to think about nations within this. Maybe the system is evolving. I mean, although people in this country don't want to think about it this way, it's evolving really into a world economy. I don't know.
I think that ship is sailed. It is a world economy. I think it is. I think that ship is sailed. I mean, it's so big. Because of exactly the problem you've described. I mean, eventually this stuff kind of evens out, because if what comes to pass is China starts pulling everything in, well, then we're going to respond, and the rest of the world's going to respond and say, okay, well, how can we bridge this? Okay, so how do we open up our trade channels so we get access to your products and you get access to ours, maybe stuff that you don't make? I mean, eventually you kind of does this, but I think it is essentially are going to have a world economy.
The problem is we're here in 2018. We're in the beginning part of the 21st century, and in some realms of society, in terms of manufacturing, science, technology, even elements of trade and commerce, many people are thinking about the 22nd century. But in terms of the military, in terms of popular thought, many times people are still thinking about the 20th century. So governments are thinking 20th century in many cases, and thinking about 20th century modalities for how to deal with complexity, where technologists and engineers are thinking 22nd century. So it's like we're stuck here right now.
And I should say consumers.
Consumers are stuck in the middle.
Consumers, I think, are out on, they're driving it. Because, I mean, look, I've already gone on and ordered stuff from Alibaba. Not Amazon. What's that mean?
Right, exactly. Consumers may not even be aware of it most of the time, but I mean, consumers are of two minds too. I mean, consumers want the value that they can get from a very integrated economy, but many people still vote for things that don't support that. So, and not just in America, all over. I mean, it's a really complex time.
Yeah.
You know, it's a really complex time. Again, as I think about it here, and again, this is going to weave into the pieces that we're going to be covering here in a couple of
We
weeks.
could keep going.
But it's we're really at a point where there's a foot in the 20th century and a foot in the 22nd century. We're here at the beginning of the 21st century trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
So, good stuff. All right, thanks for that off script, Dirk. Good job there. All right, well, that's our show for this week. We'll be at you with another big week of Quality Digest newsletter starting on Monday. We'll be back at you right here on this show a week from today with another Quality Digest Live. So you guys have a good weekend. We'll see you then.
So long.
Bye. There's a lot of fun stuff. I wish I had known that article. I just read it. Literally just saw it. It's a ZTE